We're going to get started now. Welcome, everyone. Good to see all of you online and in person. I'm going to share my screen and share a PowerPoint. All right. Can everyone online see the PowerPoint about colors and numbers? Great. Okay, so
Yes.
thank you. This is a talk that I gave at Almont New Church Camp last summer. And the theme for camp was correspondences. And so each day had a different theme. And my day was colors and numbers. And then there were also days on animals and plants and that kind of thing. It was really, really lovely. And I had a lot of fun putting together this little survey into what the Third Testament says about the symbolism, the correspondence of colors and numbers. So excited to share that with all of you tonight. And as I'm sharing this, well, I'll say, first of all, if you have a comment, raise your hand, but also I might not always see your hand, so feel free to speak out online if you have something to say. I want to start by just saying that once I'm done talking about numbers, and then also again with colors, I'm going to be asking these questions. Why is this useful? What's the point of learning about the symbolism of colors and numbers? It's certainly really interesting. There's some fun things that we'll be talking about, but as we talk about it, you can be thinking about why is this useful? Why is there so much in the Third Testament that's given talking about the symbolism of these things? So we can think about that. I'm not going to do a whole lot of reading tonight. That's part of why I don't have a handout. I'm going to start off by reading a few passages, but a lot of things I'm just going to be referencing. And maybe I'll put together a little packet of the passages at some point just for people's reference. But mostly I'm going to be referencing things. And I really wanted this to be not so much about the reading, but since it's about numbers and colors, more of a visual thing. So I have a lot of pictures that I'll be showing you. All right, but I'm going to start with a reading. This is from Secrets of Heaven 493. I must only say here that in the world, the necessity for periods of time and units of measure expressed in numbers is unavoidable, since they are among the most concrete features of the natural world. But every time such terms are used, the numbers of days and years and the numbers used in measurements symbolize something abstracted from time and measure. Just what is being symbolized depends on what the number is. This is true of the 6 days of labor and the holy seventh day. It is true of the Jubilee that was proclaimed in the 49th year of every cycle and celebrated in the 50th. It is true of the 12 tribes of Israel, matching the number of the Lord's apostles, of the 70 elders, of the equal number of the Lord's disciples, and of many other phenomena. The numbers in these places symbolize some special quality, as distinguished from the objects to which they apply. Once the qualities are isolated, their various states are what the numbers symbolize. So we think about numbers as representing quantities, but spiritually speaking, numbers represent qualities. And when we transition into the spiritual world, that's how we will experience numbers. Here's another fascinating passage. This is from Secrets of Heaven 7:16. Indeed, the inner meaning of the word contains absolutely no suggestion of numbers, since people absorbed by the inner meaning, angels and angelic spirits, for example, do not even know what a number is. Isn't that fascinating? No number in the word, no matter what it is, ever has a merely numerical meaning. So we can start to think about it sort of in the dual worlds of the number has a quantity meaning and a quality meaning, but angels only see the quality meaning of it, which is fascinating. They've moved beyond the fixed time and space that requires numbers. So fascinating. Comment?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Use the microphone, please.
There is a man who received brain damage, I think, from an injury, maybe a fever or a seizure, but he became a savant in multiple fields. He learned Icelandic fluently in 2 weeks, and
Wow.
he can do massive calculations in his head. And he says, I don't really know what's going on, but every number to me has an emotional sort of character, a personality, and they just kind of meet, and then suddenly the answer's in front of me. So it's almost like he's reaching into the spiritual world and feeling their personality, and they're telling him the answer.
Yeah, that's so fascinating.
Since you're not going to go into the periodic table, I'm going to mention just one little bit that blows my mind every time I think of it. So hydrogen's this like inert gas, and the whole of the universe is made out of vast, all the periodic table all seems so different. The difference between gold and chalk, like gold but they all break down in, it is only the number of protons and neutrons and electrons, that periodic number that makes them what they are. So you can break them all down into hydrogen. Just break off one after another, and they all break down into the God particle of the one. And it just, to me, that's just like what's that saying. It's like the number doesn't really matter. It's all just bits of God.
Yeah.
It's all just bits of the Creator.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah, so as you can imagine, from a new church perspective, we don't get caught up in what a lot of Christians get caught up in, which is the sort of numerology of the Bible, trying to calculate when will the second coming happen. We recognize that those numbers aren't talking about history or math. They're talking about something spiritual. There's this fascinating passage about angels writing in the highest heaven that comes down into the lower heavens, and it looks like numbers to the people in the lower heavens. One of the things that made me think about is the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And in some ways, numbers can be that way too. Numbers can hold so much meaning in just a short little unit. So I wonder if that's part of what that's about. But this idea that numbers are symbolic and that they have this meaning of quality is part of why it's useful to have that awareness with the translations of the Bible that we use. Because some translations of Bibles will translate units of measurement. So in a story that says that they traveled 60 stadia and translate that into miles, then we lose the symbolic meaning. So translations of the Bible that keep those numbers are good for the sake of noticing what the numbers represent. All right, let's see. Let's get into... I'll just add this thing. There was a commandment that the children of Israel should not number themselves. They should not take a census. And what that's representing is that only the Lord can know the quality of a person. And taking a census was like saying, we can know the quality of a person, like the inner quality. And only the Lord can know that. Only the Lord can know the true number of a person, which is kind of fascinating to think of it that way. All right, so it is Tuesday, so I have to say, as I'm talking about numbers, Happy Tuesday. And you can probably imagine that 2 represents the marriage of goodness and truth, those 2 things that shows up in a lot of places throughout the word, the number 2 or variations of it, number 4. Factors and multiples of numbers often mean the same thing. But I want to start talking about these 2 numbers, the number 3 and the number 12. They show up a lot in the word, the number 3 and the number 12. And interestingly, they both represent what is complete. And before I did this study, I only sort of had a vague awareness of the distinction between the 2. Why are there 2 numbers that both represent what is complete? But thinking through it, it really makes a lot of sense. If you think about the number 3 and how we use that, we often use it in a kind of a completion of progression. So we get ready to run in a race and we go 1, 2, 3, go. You know, it's this ready, set, go. 1, 2, 3. It's a progression leading up to something, and it completes on the 3rd one. And there are a lot of ways in which that shows up in our life, a completion of a progression. You wouldn't use the number 12 that way. All right, we're going to go on 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it gets boring. You can't wait that long. You can't use the number 12 that way. We say 3rd times the charm. We don't say 12th times the charm. So there's this completion in the number 3 that works really well. But the number 12 has a completion in a different sort of way, and we see that in the children of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. We see it in the 12 apostles. And if you look at what each of those tribes or people represent, it's all of the different aspects of religion. And it's lots of different things, like the understanding of truth, or doing charity, doing good things, or judgment, or temptation, or happiness, or the marriage of goodness and truth. All these aspects of religion. And it's true, religion is multifaceted that way. And the number 12 captures that idea that there's a kind of a completion in these multifaceted aspects of religion. So, number 3, number 12, both completion, but completion in very different ways. Sometimes numbers are not as obvious as to what their symbolism is, like the number 6. Sometimes it takes a kind of a spiritual math to figure things out. We could think of the number 6 as 2 times 3, and we could think about what 2 and 3 represent, and how does that make 6. But we could also think of 6 as half of 12. Okay, so is that what it's meaning? Or we could think of 6 as the number that comes right before 7, and we'll get on to what 7 means. So there's lots of different ways of looking at these numbers, and they often represent different things in different contexts. Like the 6 days of creation leading up to the 7th, that has a specific meaning that the number 6 somewhere else, where it is the half of 12, might have a slightly different meaning. My kids would be very annoyed at me talking here about 6 and 7. 6, 7. Number 7 shows up a lot in the Word. The number 7 represents what is holy, or the opposite of it, meaning it represents what is profane. I was doing a little study at one point about how often the number 7 shows up in the book of Revelation. It's the most common number in the book of Revelation. It shows up 60 times in that book, and in 3/4 of the chapters in the book of Revelation. If you think about the 7 churches, the 7 lampstands, the 7 torches, the 7 stars, the 7 spirits, the 7 seals on the scroll, 7 horns and eyes on the Lamb, 7 angels, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, 7 plagues, 7 heads of the dragon. It just keeps showing up all over the place. And when we think about what the book of Revelation is about, it's this symbolic book foretelling the coming of the new church into the world. It makes sense that it would use one of the holiest numbers, the number 7, to describe that. All right, number 13, we're just sort of going through a few of the numbers that have interesting things. Number 13 is kind of a fascinating number. I love the fact that in the book of Genesis, in chapter 14, it says, and I quote, "In the 13th year they rebelled." And I always thought that was a funny little commentary on teenagers. In the 13th year they rebelled. And interestingly, the number 13 can represent the beginning of temptation. And so it makes sense that it might represent this sort of rebellion, this rebellious part of us. I've sometimes wondered if the fact that we often think of the number 13 as unlucky maybe has some connection to its connection with temptation or spiritual struggle. There's nothing in the Third Testament that says that, but I've sometimes wondered that. Number 30. I'm pointing this one out partly because one of the great things about being in the Lord's new church is that this is not just about the numbers that appear in the Old Testament and the New Testament, but also in the Third Testament. And so we can take this same idea that when Swedenborg was recording things, writing things down, many of those numbers that he wrote down are also symbolic. So you can think about things like the fact that he said people often spend about 30 years in the world of spirits before moving on to heaven or hell. And it's an odd thing to say because the spiritual world is outside of time and space. So how does 30 years work in a place where there's no time and space as we know it? Something that feels like 30 years, I think, is what people often think of that as. But we can take it a step further and we can say, well, what does the number 30 represent? 30 is 10 times 3. 10 is a symbol for remains or remnants, and the number 3 is completion. So we can think of it as a number that represents when we have a complete set of remains or remnants that allows us to move on to a new state. And that makes perfect sense symbolically that that number 30 would appear there. That's how long that we spend in that world of spirits. Similarly, it talks about when we wake up after we die, we generally wake up after about 3 days. Well, what does that mean? 3 days in a place where there's not really, revolutions around the sun or cycle, the earth turning. What does that mean? That it feels like 3 days? It might mean that. Or it might be just a symbolic number again, that completion. Once you're ready, you will wake up in the next life. And it's not so much about how many times the earth spins. It's about once our spirit is ready, that completion that is the number 3. I had to bring up the number 42 because I'm a Douglas Adams fan. And if you don't know Douglas Adams, 42 is the number that is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything in his comical books, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I was curious to see if this number appears in the Bible, and it does. Interestingly, the beast in Revelation made war for 42 months. Also in the book of Revelation, the 2 witnesses walk the holy city for 42 months. And it's interesting to think about those 2 different things. One of them is a pretty negative thing, the beast making war for 42 months. We might think about that as being 42 as 7 times 6. And maybe that's like the 6 of the struggle combined with the 7 of profanation, 42. We can also think of it in its positive form, the 2 witnesses walking the holy city for 42 months. That might be more of that end of combat, end of conflict and struggle, 6, leading to 7, the holiness of what is 7 and the beginning of something new. So there's lots of different ways you can look at numbers and what they mean.
Do you know what the Apocalypse Revealed says about the 42 in both those places?
I believe the one about the beast does say that it represents temptation there. I think that the one, I can't remember if the Witnesses one says it. Sometimes it just doesn't say what the numbers symbolize, and we can sort of try to piece it together using spiritual math. Yes, spiritual math. There's also the number 50 that was mentioned in that quote that I read. The Jubilee was celebrated in the 50th year, the year after the 49th year, which is 7 times 7, so this is a holy number. And then we have numbers like 144. It's useful to know some math when trying to figure out what numbers symbolize, because if you know that 144 is 12 times 12, then we can start to imagine, okay, 12, that completion of things in faith, in religion. Maybe it has something to do with that. Here's another big number, 1,260. This one shows up in the book of Revelation as well. The woman clothed with the sun was in the wilderness for 1,260 days. And interestingly, 1,260 days is 3.5 years, if you add it up. And 3.5 represents what is complete and then the beginning of something new. And that's also represented by when it says a time, 1, times 2, that's now 3, and half a time. So there's another sort of interesting way of looking at numbers. Time, times, and half a time is the same as 3.5, is the same as 1,260. Also, 42 months is 3.5 years. We can go down deep rabbit holes here with some of these numbers, and it's kind of fun. Here's one that I know that the Third Testament doesn't talk about, and I'm so curious about it. This is the number of fish that were caught when the disciples threw the net on the right side of the boat and finally caught fish. 153 fish, such an odd and specific number. And unfortunately, the Third Testament doesn't tell us what it means. We could spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it means. Is it 100 plus 50 plus 3? Is it just 1 and 5 and 3? Is it 51 times 3, which happens to be 153? Is it 160 minus 7? Like, we could really go down the rabbit hole on this one. And I don't know the answer. This is one of those mysteries that I just find fascinating. But it kind of points out to me, when I go down those rabbit holes, what is the point? I'm going to come back to this question. What is the point? Sometimes we can get caught up too much, I think, in this idea of decoding the word. I know I can get caught up in that. There's so much wonderful symbolism. And it's great to have that symbolism allow us to do a certain amount of decoding. But at some point, we have to recognize that the internal sense is more fluid than just decoding something. It's something that can change from person to person. It's something that can change from state to state within a person. So getting locked in on what does this number mean, sometimes we lose the bigger picture. Maybe losing the bigger picture of what that parable or what that story was about with casting the net on the right side. So it's wonderful to think about all these symbols, but we can also get caught up in them. And that's just a little bit of something to pay attention to. So with that in mind, I want to ask now, before we move on to colors, what is the point? Why do you think we are given this information in the Third Testament about numbers? Clearly, it helps us understand some stories better, but overall, what do you see as the use of learning about the symbolism of numbers. Any thoughts about that? How do you find that useful in your life? Dawn.
Well, being the letter of the word, they are stepping stones that can lead us, if we're following the Lord, to the real internal meaning. So you can't get to the internal sense by just figuring out correspondences. You can get to the external meaning of things, but the internal sense is the Lord himself.
Yeah.
And that's a totally different thing than the just know. I mean, they are stepping stones. It's there. We can be led to something wonderful by means of them.
I love that way of phrasing it, stepping stones, because I think that's exactly right. That it's something leading us to something else, and it might be, there's the Lord on the bank of the river, and we can get stuck in the middle of the river looking at this stone. Isn't this stone cool? But it's leading us somewhere, and we need to keep moving to where it's leading. Yeah.
Speaking about divine order, we just got dumped on by tons of snow, and there's just one reference to snow really that says what it is. It's a memorable relation about people in faith alone who are in this snowy chapel,
Yeah.
and with no windows, but in that we can see that it's frozen truth. It's truth without life, right? But in a good way. When I heard that, I was in my doctrinal studies, and I was realizing it was, without snow, nothing grows very well. It seeps slowly into the soil in a way that a rush of water sometimes runs off. And it has an enormous impact on the plants and things to have a snowy year, a non-snowy year. But, you could sit there. I once saw a book where they were just pictures of snowflakes. Totally useless. How many millions and billions of pictures of each individual thing, and you can get totally enraptured in your snowmen that you're making and your snow forts and your snowballs and totally useless, but it slowly seeps in, that snow. The order that the whole world is created around is math. Mm-hmm. The whole word is created around math. And that's the divine order of the Lord. And we're in our rushy life and we don't really comprehend what divine order is. But slowly the Lord is trying to turn our minds into an alignment with his order, so that we are also walking the path that order is, and you can feel it when you have a confirmation of something beautiful from the word, where you see those numbers above numbers, and they are the way you're living. It just feels like everything lines up in a perfect in one of those things that make you happy. I forget what they're called. SMR sort of, where everything lines up and you just, it just is beautiful. And it enlightens you because you've become a form of heaven when you're in line with order. Yeah. I don't know, to me, that's the point.
Yeah, I like that.
Solomon?
Yes, go ahead. Is that David?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to continue with the way Nancy's going, is that, you can argue that in the natural world, everything ultimately boils down to mathematics. Everything is about formulas and ratios and numbers and so forth, and in particular ratios, relationships between numbers. And we know that everything natural arises from spiritual things. So if we know that, these numbers, have spiritual meanings, and we know that everything, in some sense is numbers, then we know that everything is spiritual. So.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you. Kent.
Well, there has to be a way of communicating ideas in a symbolic form, and so numbers serve that purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful glimpse into the way that the Lord communicates with us in so many different ways. It's a wonderful glimpse into the order of the universe, the pattern of the universe. I like to think of it as it's more than just order, it's a pattern. And people delight in seeing these patterns in numbers, and we can have a similar delight in seeing the way that the Lord has structured the universe, and numbers is one of those things.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, and then
One more thing is that.
can you use the mic?
Oh, sorry. There's a passage that says the celestial language is a language of that's very numerical,
Yeah.
and because it's all about the love. It's just if you go into quantum physics and with a head that doesn't really understand math like mine, you start to realize it's just it's all about that wave pattern. It's all about that love that is this overriding principle. It all comes down to this singular point, and the quantum physicists don't have the words that we have, that it's just this divine love that is this created, the Lord, the Creator. And when Blake drew the picture of the Lord, the Creator, William Blake, who was a Swedenborgian, he drew him with a compass as his finger, because it's all about the math.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so I want to move on to colors now. In some ways, I feel like numbers is kind of like looking at the Lord's creation from a little bit more of a truthy perspective, and colors is a little bit more of that affectional goodness perspective, and they're both different ways of viewing the Lord's creation. But yeah, let's talk about colors. One I've always loved, since I was a little kid, I remember hearing the passage in the Third Testament that said that there are colors in heaven that do not exist here in this world. And that just blew my mind. And I was so excited to get to go to heaven to see these colors that don't exist here. And why is that? What is it about even just a color that's different that could bring so much delight to us? Colors have this fascinating way of bringing delight. I wanted to share a little bit about, there's a fascinating footnote to Secrets of Heaven 1042, and it talks about, this is in the New Century Edition, it's talking about Swedenborg's color theory, which I think was really just the color theory of the time that Swedenborg also understood. And interestingly, the color theory of the time was that colors were made out of different combinations of black and white. That's how you get colors, by varying shades of black and white. Almost like mixing just those two paints, and you get different colors. I think nowadays science would say it's more about what light waves are reflected back and what light waves are absorbed. But it's interesting that in many ways, symbolically, I wonder if that theory about color is maybe closer to the truth in terms of the varying colors being these varying mixings of what is true and what is not true, or what is good and what is not good in varying degrees. It's just fascinating to think about how there might actually be some truth to that, maybe to both scientific views on color. There's a really wonderful passage. I'm not going to take the time to read it, but I encourage you to read this one. This is Secrets of Heaven 1043, and it is talking about the rainbow in the Noah story. And it is one of my favorite passages. I know I say that all the time, but this is one of my favorite passages, and it's talking about how the Lord's truth, when it comes into our minds as human beings, it sort of filters in. And it talks about how you can't have a rainbow without a cloud. If you had a bright sunny day, you would not see a rainbow. You need that cloud, and this is where we get into that idea of maybe colors as just mixing of white and black. You need that cloud to create the beautiful color in the rainbow. And this passage talks about how that is all of the imperfection in humanity, the different ways that we are not perfect, is that cloud in our minds. And what an amazing thing that the Lord uses our imperfections to create beauty in the world. All the different ways that we are not perfect is part of what gives us all our personalities. And that's beautiful, like a rainbow. And I just love that. And of course, the passage says it way better than I'm saying it. So I encourage you to read that at some point. 1043. There's another passage that talks about how in the spiritual world, people often see rainbows around people. And it's kind of this indication of what their state is. You can look at the colors around a person and get a sense of what their state is from their aura. People talk about being able to see auras even in this world, but in the spiritual world, that seems like a much more common thing that you see that. All right, let's talk about some colors. I've always loved the nature of complementary colors. There's something about that I've just always loved. The fact that there are these two different colors on opposite sides of the color wheel that match in some way. And you can't even necessarily explain why. Why do they match? Why do they go together so well? And I think that this is maybe a way of the Lord illustrating the marriage of goodness and truth through these different complementary colors. We often think of the complementary colors of red and white. That's a very common new church way of thinking about the marriage of goodness and truth. But I think we can expand that into thinking about all the complementary colors and how they might be different ways of representing goodness and truth. But since the Third Testament focuses a lot on red and white, let's talk a little bit about red and white. So red and white symbolize love and wisdom, or goodness and truth. There's a fascinating description of the Lord on the throne in Revelation 4, and he is described as being the colors red and white, or jasper and sardius, different stones that have these different colors. And it's just so amazing that right there in that image, the Lord is these colors, red and white. And we don't even really know what would that have looked like. All the imagery in Revelation is kind of bizarre that way. But it's all symbolic, the red and white of the Lord on the throne. It's interesting that jasper is the one that's considered white and sardius is considered red. But you can actually find jasper that is red as well.
Jasper comes in all
colors, yeah. Which I think that there's maybe some symbolism there, that there's all colors in truth. It's kind of fun. We often think about angels wearing white, but there are passages that say it's spiritual angels that wear white. But celestial angels, heavenly angels, actually wear red. We don't often picture angels wearing red, and once again, it's symbolic. It's not like angels always wear the same color. But it's that coming across, the way that they come across in either red or white. So red is a symbol for love or goodness or what is celestial or what is heavenly. It can also have the opposite of those. So the fiery red dragon in the book of Revelation is the opposite of love, hatred. There's that passage in Isaiah, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be as wool. So red can also have that opposite representation. White represents wisdom and truth, or what is spiritual, but it can also have an opposite representation as well. White, if you think of white as a kind of a pale color, colorless color, it can represent what is dead or lifeless. It can represent falsity. It's the color of leprosy, so it can represent that sickness when we turn away from the Lord. Interestingly, here's another one that caught my eye as I was doing this study. The primary colors are mentioned in a passage in the Third Testament, and it says that the colors yellow, blue, and red all represent goodness, which is kind of fascinating. We often think of just red as representing goodness, but all the primary colors represent what is good.
Primary pigment colors,
Yes.
not the primary light colors, which are green, blue, and red.
Yes, primary pigment colors. All right, let's launch into some other colors, though, beyond the primary. I was going to ask you, I forgot to ask you this at the beginning. Do you know what color in the rainbow is never mentioned in the Bible? And I have it on the screen, so I missed my chance to have a little quiz. But the color orange is never mentioned in the Bible, which is just kind of fascinating.
It had a bad correspondence. Why did I think that?
It's mentioned only briefly in the Third Testament. There's a mention of orange trees a couple times. There are only 2 mentions in the Third Testament that are apart from orange trees, which is really talking about a fruit. One is a place where it mentions somebody wearing orange clothing in conjugal love. And another one in Earths in the Universe where it talks about this orange and blue light on the third world in the starry heaven. And it's just kind of this random mention of the color orange. And you might read it and go, oh, fascinating, but not realize that's only one of 2 places that this color appears in all of the Third Testament. And there's no mention, because it's not talked about much, no mention of what orange might correspond to or what it symbolizes. But we can do a little sleuthing, kind of figure some things out. Orange is similar. It's a kind of a browny color. Brown is mentioned. And this might be what you're getting at, Dawn, that the color brown is sort of like the color black in that it can represent what is in our proprium, what is our own, as opposed to what is the Lord's. It's mentioned in the speckled and spotted sheep, the brown sheep. So it could represent something negative. But we could also think about other colors. There are actually quite a few orangey colors in the Bible, like the metallic colors of copper, brass, and bronze. And in those cases, it's very clear that these colors, these orangey metallic colors, represent natural goodness, the goodness of the natural world as opposed to the spiritual world, or as a support for the spiritual world, not necessarily opposed to. But those aren't really orange. I think one of the closest places that I found something being described as orange is the color amber. And amber can really have a bunch of different ways that it manifests. It's sort of this resin that can have this orangey look to it. But the color amber appears in the book of Ezekiel. And once again, it's this description of the Lord. This vision that Ezekiel has, and he sees the Lord, and it says that he was the color amber, and that there was fire all around. And it says very specifically there that color, the color amber, represents love, because it's this fiery color. And so we can sort of see that. You know, it looks fiery. We think of fire and warmth as representing love. So amber is kind of the orange that shows up in the word.
Does it talk about gold?
Yes, we're getting to that. No, it's fine. We'll get to that in a second. Here's another one The color scarlet does get talked about in the word. Scarlet is really a kind of orangey red. I don't know how well that's showing up on your screen. But scarlet it's orangey red or a really reddish orange, somewhere between orange and red. This is actually technically the color of Catholic cardinals. That is the color they wear, scarlet, this orangey red. And scarlet gets talked about quite a bit in the Third Testament. It is, here's a little comparison. I don't know how well that's showing up, but there's the comparison of scarlet and red. You can see scarlet is more orange than red. Do they look the same? Yeah.
They're very different.
You see it as different? I wasn't sure how well this would show up on the screen, but they are technically different. Slightly orange-red. But yes, scarlet represents spiritual goodness or charity. I'm just going to read a couple things about that. When the color scarlet appears in the other world, it symbolizes spiritual goodness, which is goodness born of charity for one's neighbor. That's one place. That's Secrets of Heaven 49:22. Another place says, twice dyed scarlet means mutual love.
That's at the tabernacle, right?
Yes,
Dyed scarlet.
referring to the colors in the tabernacle. And this is all going to sort of culminate in talking about those particular colors, because I feel like a lot of the color theory in the Third Testament kind of revolves around the colors of the tabernacle. So it represents mutual love. Interestingly, in that place it says it represents celestial truth, which is the same thing as the good of mutual love. And that might sound a little confusing, but we're going to get into what that's talking about. In this case, scarlet represents celestial truth, which is the same thing as the good of mutual love. And this is why I think it's wonderful to actually look at these colors, because once we get to the part where I can explain that better, you're going to be able to see the colors better and see a little bit more why this is the case. But we have to wait a little bit before we get there. Here, another place that says, for what comes down from the celestial heaven and appears on a lower level begins as flaming red, but is turned into scarlet on the lower level by the whiteness of light in the middle heaven through which it passes. So it's sort of a not quite red, but almost red. So it's a spiritual good. It's not the celestial good, the heavenly good, but it's getting there. It's spiritual good. And we'll get to a little bit more of what that's about.
Is that the flaming brightness one? The true conjunction with the Lord with wisdom? I love that.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to read all the passages. I can't remember if I'm going to actually read that one, but we'll get close to it. All right, so moving on, we'll come back to scarlet, but moving on in the color scheme, we've got yellow. Yellow is also not talked about very much in the word. Yeah, it's mentioned 5 times. That's what I could find, at least in the New King James Version. It's often in reference to leprosy or sulfur, like this one, sulfur yellow. In the book of Revelation, it's referenced as a sort of a sulfur yellow. And so yellow, this kind of yellow, like a sickly yellow, can have a negative correspondence. In the Third Testament, there are passages that talk about a sickly kind of yellow, that people in the other life sometimes appear with this sickly yellow. And in some cases, in some cases, it talks about halos that people have around their head. And one of them references a yellow halo, but it was a negative thing. And it referenced it as this person was stuck in the love of wealth. And so you can almost think of it as they have this gold around their head, but it's the gold of wealth. Like, all I care about is wealth.
But it has a wonderful correspondence as well.
It does. We're getting to that.
I keep thinking of the chakras. Like
Yeah.
the solar plexus.
Yeah, I wanted to start with the negative and move to the positive.
Okay. All right.
Because interestingly, the yellow mostly shows up in the Bible as a negative thing. It very rarely shows up as a positive. But you, Shelley, were mentioning the color gold, which is often thought of as yellowish. And that's where we get a little bit more of that positive.
Every color has got to have a good correspondence. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it is. It does feel a little unfair to these colors to label them as good or bad. But everything really does have a positive and a negative. So I suppose even sulfur yellow.
Breastplate of Aaron, there's a yellow stone.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really when we get into sort of more of a golden yellow that you find the correspondences shift more positive. It talks in a number of passages about there being a golden yellow light in heaven. It's just sort of all around, and that's this symbol of the goodness of love. We heard about how that primary color is yet another color that represents the goodness of love.
I mean, Swedenborg painted his house yellow, so it's got to have something.
Yeah. I'm going to come, will I come back to it? No, that's mostly what I want to say about yellow for now. It does, when it's golden like that, it has a very good correspondence. And gold, the actual color gold appears numerous times in the Bible. Moving on to green. What do you suppose green symbolizes? Now, why would you think that? Yes, it is a leading question. Life. It's interesting, the different places that green shows up. It's very often directly in reference to life, like in Psalm 23. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. And it's so comforting. That color there in Psalm 23 is so comforting. It's not just he makes me lie down in pastures, where we think about being fed. There's something about that color that is delightful and comforting. Yeah.
I like the emerald rainbow that comes out from the throne of God. Oh,
Yes, we're getting to that too.
Okay.
This is fine. You're getting ahead, but that's totally fine. I'm glad that you guys are thinking ahead to these things. So yes, that's one of the, before we get to that, I think there are a couple different places that green gets referenced and what it symbolizes. Sometimes it's having a perception of what is true. Sometimes it's the way that truth is turned into goodness. Sometimes it's symbolizing early stages of our regeneration. But I think all of that can kind of be summed up in this idea that it represents our spiritual growth, just as it represents natural growth in the natural world. It represents our spiritual growth. And yes, as Nancy was saying, there's this fascinating place in the book of Revelation where it says that there was an emerald rainbow around the throne of heaven, throne of God. And I'll read that passage in our Apocalypse Revealed that talks about that. The divine atmosphere which surrounds the Lord emanates from both his divine love and divine wisdom together. And when that atmosphere is represented in the heavens, it appears in the celestial kingdom red, like a ruby. In the spiritual kingdom, blue, like lapis lazuli. And in the natural kingdom, green, like an emerald. Everywhere with an indescribable splendor and radiance. And it's so fascinating that it appears green in that description in the book of Revelation and not blue or red. Any thoughts about why that might be?
Emeralds can be blue or red. They're mostly green.
Yeah, that's true.
Just putting that out there. But it's because he's the Lord descending and making life.
Yeah, one of the ways I like to think about it is this imagery of the coming of the new church in the book of Revelation is this promise of the Lord's presence coming all the way into the natural world. And I think it's very fitting that it would have a green emerald rainbow around it when describing that.
I
Yeah, Celestial Natural Church. Yep. It's interestingly with the color green, before we move off of the color green, it's fascinating to try to think about where does the color green appear naturally apart from plants? Can you think of anything?
Malachite.
Eyes. And our eyes are sometimes green. What?
Malachite.
Malachite? Is that a
Stone.
stone?
Serpentine. I can name a lot.
Yeah, various stones, emeralds, things like that. It was interesting that copper rust. Yep, that was another one I thought of.
The sky occasionally.
Sometimes you see a little green in the sky. It's fascinating. There are some negative things. One of the things that I was thinking about is part of, I think, what makes the northern lights so amazing is that they're green. And sometimes they're green. And that's so striking because we almost only see the color green in plant life or some of these other things. Frogs, that's another one. But mostly that's where we see the color green. And yet in the northern lights, it's this, I like to think of that emerald rainbow around the throne as being like the northern lights. And yes, as Kent, as you were saying, there's also the sickly green. And there are ways in which green can be and have a negative correspondence. The sulfur and brimstone and sulfur in the book of Revelation can be green. The plague of the frogs in Exodus, that's sort of a negative green. Sometimes people picture the pale horse as sort of greenish. So green can have a negative correspondence as well, as is evident from this emoji. All right, let's move on to blue. Here's where things get really interesting, I think. There are 3 Latin words in the Third Testament that get used for the color blue.
Is hyacinth really blue? That isn't how hyacinth is.
Yes, is hyacinth blue or purple? We're going to get into that. Yeah. But these are words that get used and translated as blue. Hyacinthus, caeruleus, and cyanus are different words for blue in the Third Testament. And if red is a symbol for goodness, what do you think blue is a symbol for? Truth? Remember that passage that I referenced before, the primary colors. This is one of the things that I bumped into in my studies here, because I would have said truth. Goodness and truth, red and blue. There's something about it that just makes sense. But more often, the color blue is a symbol for goodness.
It's also the reception of conjugal love by the husband.
Yes, it comes up in the imagery about the conjugal love, those colors representing conjugal love. And it's just so fascinating that color is a symbol for goodness. I'm going to read this. I don't think I actually read this passage before. This is from Secrets of Heaven 8458. Goodness is presented as something rounded, as a shape that is uninterrupted, as opposed to things that are multifaceted, that tends to represent, or sharp, that tends to represent truth, whereas something that's round represents goodness. And goodness, in respect to color, is represented as blue, yellow, and red. And then it often says that white is the color that is representing truth. But there is something about our minds that goes, no, blue is about truth, right? And there is truth to that as well. But it's just fascinating that the color blue is often a symbol for what is goodness. Here's one from Secrets of Heaven 43:28. The blue, this is caeruleum color. I'll start at the beginning. The nature, cerulean, is it a soft C? Okay. the nature of the goodness that existed in the heavenly church was illustrated to me by a pillar coming down from the sky. It was blue. And on the left side was a luminous glow resembling the fiery halo of the sun. These features represented those people's first stage. The blue color represented goodness in their will, which is so fascinating. I would not have expected those words to follow. I would have thought the blue represents truth in their understanding, right? No, goodness in their will. Blue symbolizes goodness, and a fiery glow, the truth produced by goodness. Here's another one. The blue of the sky being truth transparent with good. It's fascinating. And here's another one. A lapis lazuli, an agate, and an amethyst means the spiritual love of good. These are blue-colored stones.
Tell me the 3 stones.
Lapis lazuli, an agate, and an amethyst means the spiritual love of good. This is clear in a similar way from their color. For the blue color, this is ceruleum, which is a product of white, means spiritual good, or what amounts to the same thing, the spiritual love of good. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's just, there's a number of places where it says goodness is a symbol blue is a symbol for goodness. Amethyst is purpley. We'll get into purple in a minute. There's a fascinating place that talks about different shades of blue that are the product of red, as opposed to shades of blue that are the product of white. And I remember reading that going, what? What is going on here? I feel like I have to throw out all of my color theory now. Blue that's the product of red as opposed to blue that's the product of white. What is going on? And I think this is where we start to get into these are symbolic. These are things that are symbolic, describing something beyond what we can even capture with our physical eyes. Blue that contains a flame-like red corresponds to good actions that are motivated by heavenly love, while blue that contains a shining white corresponds to good actions that are motivated by spiritual love.
That's just talking about aquamarine blue, it's a red blue.
Yeah, and
It's gorgeous. I mean, it's like what you think.
yeah,
Flames have those things blue.
Yeah, flames have blue.
It sounds though that he's talking maybe about those colors in heaven that don't exist on earth.
I sometimes wonder if that's part of what it is. Right. It might be colors that we can't quite see yet. It might be, yeah, sometimes flames have a blueness to them. It might be that it's talking about shades of blue that border on purple. We're going to get to that as well. But it's just fascinating. I think it's so fascinating. I want to move on to, okay, so most of those passages that I just read were talking about this color, ceruleus, which is usually a sky blue. Sometimes it's called azure or cerulean blue. And it is a spiritual kind of goodness is what it usually represents. You could think of that as like a truthy kind of goodness. And so I think that makes sense to me in my heart. That, okay, that blue, it's a truthy kind of goodness. Yeah. Water blue, yeah. Water that is fluid, you know, that has that softness of goodness. Yeah.
And we say true blue.
What was that?
We say true blue.
True blue, yes. There's also, is it cyanus or cyanus, Nancy? Is it cyanus? In the Third Testament, this is translated as a dark blue. It's understood to be a dark blue, which is fascinating because we would say that modern cayenne or cyan is more of a light blue. But in the Third Testament, that is referring to a dark blue. It doesn't show up a whole lot. It does show up in that beautiful imagery on the wall in Conjugal Love of talking about the colors of the husband and wife. There are a few places where it shows up. But what shows up more is this word, hyacinthus. And this is where it gets so fascinating because you get different translations translating it different ways. The Potts translation of Secrets of Heaven translates hyacinthus as blue, and the Eliot translation translates it as violet. And
Hyacinths, the flower, are purple.
right, hyacinths are more of that
Well,
violet
they
color.
print them in all different colors nowadays, but they originally were purple.
Yeah, when you think of a hyacinth, you're going to think of something more purpley or violet. Or something beautiful smelling. I know people sometimes talk about how they can smell colors, which is fascinating. But this color represents celestial truth or mutual love, and that might sound familiar. We've heard about a color that represents these things, but it wasn't violet. Here's a little comparison of the difference between violet and purple. And I don't know how well that shows up on your screen, but you can maybe see why some people might think of violet as more of a blue color than purple. There's also... Next to the purple, that just looks blue to me. Yeah, next to the purple, it looks blue. If I were to isolate the violet, it's not exactly the same color, but it's different, yeah. But isolating it, you'd maybe say that's more purpley or violet.
There are millions of colors.
There are millions of colors. But here's where we get into some of the confusion of what this color is. You know, we have this Latin word trying to figure out what the color is. Here's the Eliot translation, and it says, the reason why violet has this meaning, celestial truth, being that it is a celestial color. Now, the Potts translation says that blue has this signification is because it belongs to the color of the sky. And those are both legitimate translations of the word celestial. Celestial meaning the sky versus celestial meaning the highest heaven. And so one translator chose to see it as, oh, that's skyish. I'll call it blue. Another one chose to see it as, oh, celestial. It's probably more purpley. And that's created some confusion in readers of the Third Testament. But I think that's part of the trick of all this, is what colors are we actually talking about here?
Did you, by chance, ask Jonathan or Lisa
What the New Century Edition will be? Hang on to that thought. We're going to get to. I didn't, but I have some suggestions for them.
Better get to them quick.
Yes. So hyacinthine symbolizes intelligence springing from the affection of spiritual love, because this color takes its hue from the redness of fire and the whiteness of light. So there's clearly some redness in this blue, in this purple, in this violet.
Color of the crown chakra is,
Yeah.
violet-y, sparkly, like there's truth in there, but it's also this enveloping love.
Yeah. I think that this is...
Purple of the crown chakra thing, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think, I prefer the Eliot translation here because I do think that this is meant to be a more violet color than blue, but we're going to get into why I don't think it's a full-on purple either. Violet as the celestial love of truth, which is the goodness of mutual love. We're going to get into that again. Moving on to purple, the word, oh, do we have a
That's not the color it is.
Do we have a question?
No, I was trying to block.
Oh, I see, doing that. Okay, so purpura is the word that is usually translated purple, sometimes crimson. Crimson, I think, is a more accurate translation of what color we're talking about here, because this is from a footnote from a translator in Conjugal Love. Purple
That
with
is not purpura.
Purple with Swedenborg always means the royal or red purple of the ancients. To avoid confusion, it is here rendered crimson. The blue in our text is the Latin hyacinthium, a blue that is slightly tinged with red, while the term rendered dark blue in the Latin is cyanus. So the translator has given a little bit of direction here in terms of their understanding of what these colors mean. And I think it is important that we think of this color, whatever we call it, purple, crimson, as being more on the red side of things.
That color is fuchsia.
Yes.
You have on the thing.
That's one of my suggestions for the New Century Edition. We'll get to that. But this, whatever this is, whatever color this is a representation for celestial goodness. Not spiritual goodness, but celestial goodness. The highest goodness that we can have. This is, the angels wear this color, theoretically. Not just the red that we might think of as red, but a kind of a crimson. It even talks about how, I want to read this one. This is fascinating. True Christian Religion 537. People who, as a religious practice, do good actions that have to do with goodwill, and as a part of that same practice do not do evil things, but who have not yet accepted the teaching of the new church about the Lord, in heaven their clothes are red. After they have been initiated into the good actions and attitudes taught by the new church, however, their clothes become purple, and the word there is purpura. And if they also accept the truths of the new church, more and more beautifully radiant.
Where is that?
This is True Christian Religion 537. It's fascinating. So here we might then, let's see, what was my next thing? Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about this. So we've got these different translation choices here. In Potts, these two colors are referred to as blue and crimson, and in Eliot, they're referred to as violet and purple. I think my favorite of the two are violet and crimson across two different translations. But the question is, I know, Nancy, you're struggling here.
It's not the colors.
This is, as far as I can tell, these are the colors that we're getting at.
Crimson is like the color of dark blood.
It's like that dark,
It's-
flower yours.
It's like I sort of picture it as being like a wine color.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, dark.
Yeah, and this, like I said, coming across on the screen, it doesn't always. Yeah. But Kent brought up the interesting question of how is the New Century Edition going to translate these things. So I came up with some possible options here for them to consider. One is this one here. Oh, did we freeze?
You froze in one screen, but not the other.
Oh, I think we froze.
Your personal computer is seems okay.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, so there are lots of different words we could use for these different colors. Periwinkle, magenta, lilac and burgundy, mauve and plum, lavender and orchid, grape and raspberry.
Grape and raspberry.
I don't know that that would work for me in the New Century Edition, but
The raspberry would work great as fuchsia.
heliotrope and fuchsia. There's so many different words to describe these different colors, and they're not all the same necessarily, but it's one of those things. I'm just using this as an example.
They're all different colors.
I'm using this as an example of how translation fails, really, to get across the colors, because we can't quite capture it in words. I want to come back to violet and scarlet, because you might have caught on that both of these colors represent mutual love. And they're so different. And why is it that you have two very different colors representing the same thing? And this is where we get into some fascinating aspects of spiritual color theory. There are passages that talk about these colors, and once again, these aren't quite the way they're meant to show up on the screen necessarily. They look a little different on my screen. But there are passages that talk about crimson or purpura as being that celestial goodness that is love to the Lord, and then violet being celestial truth, which is love of the neighbor or mutual love, because love of the neighbor is the form of love of the Lord in the celestial heaven. But then it goes on to talk about how there's this interesting overlap between the external of the celestial heaven and the internal of the spiritual heaven. The internal of the spiritual heaven being spiritual goodness, which is also love of the neighbor and mutual love. But it's because that is the essence of truth, which is the external of the spiritual heaven, which is white. And so you get these two very different colors that are both representing this sort of overlapping place between the heavens. The internal of the spiritual is also the external of the celestial. And I think it's so fascinating to picture this in the form of colors.
Are you going to stand that on its end and make the curtain?
Yes, so these colors are the colors that appear in the tabernacle. And they get referenced a lot in the Bible and then also in the Third Testament as being really holy colors. They are all throughout the tabernacle, and it's not just this image of these sort of degrees of heaven. I want to point out this thing, that on the spiritual level, goodness and truth take on this red and whiteness to them. But on the celestial level, they take on more of a purple and violet.
Can you flip it back just for a second?
To this,
No.
to this. Yeah, so on the spiritual level, it's often how we think of goodness and truth, red and white. But I love the way that on the celestial level, the colors start to come closer together. That purpura, or that crimson and that violet, are colors that are closer together than red and white are. And that's the nature of goodness and truth on the celestial level. They are closer together, which is fascinating. Here's what Nancy was asking for, this sort of vertical description of these. And there's another passage that talks about these colors being a progression, that we go through a kind of progression, that it starts with, we receive truth from the Lord, which is this white color. And that then inspires an affection for the truth, which is sort of that second stage. That's represented by the color violet. And that inspires an affection for goodness, which is the color crimson. And that finally results in spiritual goodness, goodness in action, the color scarlet. And so you see these colors sort of in different formats, in different ways throughout the Word.
It upset me very much when I painted it for the first time and realized they were very flashing and uncomfortable colors.
I actually don't like the way they're appearing on the screen right now. I don't know how that's showing up online for you guys. They look a little better on my computer.
I tried to picture a quilt with those colors, and
Yeah.
kind of bending my brain a little bit.
Well, I've seen some really, really beautiful sort of almost like cross-stitch of these different colors put together, and they can be really beautiful. Once again, the screen maybe is not doing them justice.
And it's possible
Oh, that's a better,
Yeah, that
better,
one's
that's better. Your scarlet is more scarlet-y there.
Yeah,
it's possible that the particular colors that we're interpreting as the words are not what they intended originally.
well, and this is how I often picture the colors being described in the Word, these three, which are really more of a blue and a purple and a red. I think, once again, it's not going to show up well on the screen, but I do think this, which is more of a violet, more of a crimson, and more of a scarlet, is a more accurate depiction of the colors in the tabernacle. And here's why I like these colors even better than the sort of more true colors, because there's something kind of magical about these colors. These colors kind of change depending on what other colors they are near. So, for example, crimson, if you put that next to this color, it looks very red. Whereas if you put it next to that color, it suddenly looks very purple. And so these colors, I think of these colors as sort of magical colors that change. And it's kind of the way the Lord's goodness changes and adapts depending on our different states. Violet is similar. If you put it next to blue, it looks pretty purpley. Whereas if you put it next to a true purple, it looks more blue. It's more of a bluish kind of color. Yeah, once again, the screen isn't doing it very, very much justice. Yeah. Scarlet also, if you put it next to a red, you can see that's an orangey color. But if you put it next to orange, it looks pretty red. And I love yeah, even like looking back and forth between this screen and my screen, this is more yellow than what's on my screen. So I apologize if it's not showing up quite right. People online might actually be seeing it better than the people in the room here. And this, of course, also makes me think of that whole the dress thing, where the colors appear in different ways to different people. Is it gold and white, or is it blue and black? I had to bring this up because it reminded me of that we see colors differently. People see colors differently. And what an interesting way of describing the various ways that we receive the Lord's goodness and truth, in the ways people see colors differently. It's kind of fascinating. I want to just close with a reference to something that I've always been intrigued by, which is this description in Conjugal Love of a rose garden. And it describes the various colors in the rose garden in concentric circles. On the outside were these purpley or crimson roses, and then there were golden roses, and then sort of a bluish blue roses, and then green, or sort of a bluey green, and then there was a pool of water in the middle. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to draw that, because I've never been able to really picture that in my mind. And it's a fascinating collection of colors, and there's no description in the Third Testament of why that particular rose garden had those particular colors. And we could spend some time trying to decode that, and I'll leave that to all of you for some homework, maybe.
It's interesting, in the 30s, they developed the first yellow rose. There were no yellow roses before the 30s.
Yeah, it's a fascinating collection of
Texas.
colored roses. Yeah. But I just wanted to point that out, that there are lots of places throughout the Third Testament where you might just try to pay some special attention to what are the colors being used here, and maybe even try to draw it sometime, because it brings it to life more than just reading the names of these colors.
Solomon.
Yes.
I while I was looking at the your comparisons between colors throughout your whole thing about color, I couldn't help but think of my two brothers who are colorblind. They cannot distinguish between certain colors, and throughout their lives they've had to ask for help. Throughout school, there was one time we went on a family hiking trip up a mountain, and we as a family forgot that they were colorblind, so they took the point that they could not see the blazes because it was red on brown. It was like, why are we going up? Whoops, the boys can't see the blazes. Never mind. You guys go back in the line. We'll take point.
Yeah.
So, what you said about different people see different things. I wonder what they can see when they don't see the colors the way, people with normal rods and cones in their eyes can see. So,
Yeah. And
so
it's,
they wouldn't be able to tell to them, oh, that looks brown, or when it looks red, oh, isn't that brown? So
yeah,
it's very interesting.
It is. It's fascinating. I've sometimes talked to people who are colorblind that talk about how they have to memorize which light is on top on a stoplight because they can't tell the difference between red and green. And it's kind of fascinating. But it makes me think that we're going to get to the other world and we're all going to say, I was colorblind because now I really see. Now I really see colors. So I want to just end with this question once again. Why? What is the point of all of this? So much information in the Third Testament about the symbolism of colors. What do you think it means? Why is it important? Kent.
This actually relates back to the numbers too, but so that when we're in nature or just on this earth, we can reflect on the spiritual meanings.
Yeah. I love that. I love the fact that you've talked about how we could be doing that more. We could be reading nature the way we read the word with using this symbolism. Yes, Nancy.
So a mantis shrimp sees massive more colors than we do, like thousands of more colors than we do. And one of my favorite memes I've ever seen was these two identical pictures, and one of them says, "This is the way you see," and the other one says, "This is the way a mantis shrimp sees."
Yeah.
And it's the same is true when we're dealing with the spiritual sense of the word. If you can't see it, this is how a natural person sees, and this is how a spiritual person sees, and it's the same picture. Because we open up to the inner life of things, the Lord inside things. The Lord is the glory within the cloud being the letter of the word. And we need that letter. We need that spectrum in order to see God. You need the Lord present on earth in order to see him to eternity. So we need that cloud in order to have the prism to actually see the Lord. So, but to know that the mantis shrimp sees more than I do is to know that there are steps above the ladder that I can reach. And I might never really comprehend the glory of the Lord's light in this world, but I can know it's there, and I can strive towards it, and I can strive towards an understanding of how my vision is. Your thought is from your mind and not your eye, and I can strive towards letting the Lord lift me up into a spiritual vision of color of himself present within each and everything. The sort of namaste or the Buddha nature, or however you want to say it, the Lord's life within the cloud, his life within the natural. And I won't see it most of the time. I'll just see two pictures equally the same. But sometimes I will see it.
Yeah.
and I will strive to see it all the time.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a comment about the light spectrum. What we see is only a tiny percent of the light spectrum. I was just Googling online the light spectrum, and what we see is like that, and the light spectrum is like, that. It's much wider. And so every time I'm looking at something when I'm trying to draw or paint, I'm like, I'm only seeing the tiniest fraction of the universe. When the universe, including the spiritual world, is much more vast than I could ever imagine. And so I'm even though I have this access to all this, wonderful spiritual knowledge, it's still a tiny fraction of what is actually there.
Yeah,
As Swedenborg said, I can elaborate, but I can't because there's no language to describe what I'm seeing. So, yeah, it's just fascinating that what I'm seeing right now is so like under a microscope compared to what is actually there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Shelley.
I keep thinking of the first thing you said, that the colors in heaven, there are colors in heaven that don't exist on earth. And what, I don't know your name, I'm sorry, who just spoke?
Tiffany.
Tiffany was saying it's 0.0035% of light that we see of electromagnetic, which is minuscule. 0.35%. So you wonder, is it that there are colors in heaven that don't exist on earth, or do we just don't see those colors?
Right. Do
So
they
that's
exist?
what I thought.
Yeah.
That's what I've been thinking of ever since you said that. Is it?
Yeah.
Are they only in heaven, or because heaven is on earth too, right? I mean, that's my
Yeah.
understanding of it.
I think that's a good way of thinking of it, that the colors exist, and it's just that we will get to a point where we can see more, and that's really what that whole journey of spiritual growth is about, is being able to see more to lead us to higher places. Yeah.
Just real quick, this is something I've stated in a few sermons and doctrinal class, but the idea that color is a mix of light and dark, you even described the modern Newtonian color theory in terms of light and dark, because if white light is all color and you remove some of the rays and darken them or mute them so that it's dark, then you get a color.
Yeah.
So they're not mutually exclusive theories.
Yeah. Good point. Any other thoughts about this? Oh yeah, I'll stop share. I think one of the reasons that this matters for me is there's so much beauty in color, and it's one of those areas where I feel like, to me, that's sort of evidence of the Lord's love for us, because why do we need it aside from making us truly happy? Like it just brings delight, all these colors, and it's just such a wonderful evidence of God's love. And we see it in this natural world, and we'll see more of that evidence of God's love in the next life too. And that it's this beautiful way of describing variety and the beauty of variety, whether that's the variety of amongst people or the variety of our own lives, the different states we go through that can sometimes feel like, oh, this is a negative state or this is a positive state, but putting it in terms of color can help us see that it's all beautiful. It all has beauty to it, different kinds of beauty. So there's something about, the words on the page of the word are wonderful, but they're all black and white. And color brings it to life more somehow, which I love. Oh, I'm losing my voice. Perfect timing. That brings us to the close of this. Thank you, everyone, for coming.